you believe in it. And if you believe in it, you do it. And if you do it, you go out and get your shoe leather worn.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in, whether you're listening to us as a podcast or watching us on Facebook or YouTube. Thank you very much. My name is John Potter. I am the host of the Lib Dem Podcast, as well as a counsellor here in sunny Preston. And with me, we discussed last year about our unsung heroes within the party. And I mentioned a chap called Alan Hackett, who to give him his full title, is Alderman Alan Hackett. Honorary Alderman, so there we go. Who has been campaigning in the party for 50 years now, is it, Alan?
Yeah, just about. Yeah, my first actual contest was 1963 in what was then Thornton-Cleveleys Urban District Council. I didn't win that year, and for the next 3 years I was the recount wizard. I lost by 6 in 1964, I lost by 20 in 1965, I gained at a by-election in 1965 by 1.
By 1?
And lost it again the year after, and the year after that, in 1967, I actually won by 37.
So do you think those things? Because I remember my first big campaign, and you'll know this because you were around when I tried to take a seat in 2010 and missed out by 50, and I thought, and at that point I said, well, I'm never going to let that happen again. Do you think that kind of, well, it's never a good thing to lose narrowly, but do you think it toughens you up?
Yes, you say, I've done all that work. I think I was probably one of the first people in that area in Cleveleys, which is where I come from, doing the equivalent of a focus sheet. It wasn't actually called one, it was some councillor's newsletter or something that I'd issued myself. The wards were smaller, so it was easy to handle. I didn't need too many helpers. But having lost by such a narrow margin, and then having to contest the same seat the year after because it had been an all-out, so it was the third man standing again.
Yeah.
And he got back in, and I thought, I'm going to get these beggars. Eventually I did. Unfortunately, of course, what happened was work got in the way in the end, because in 1970, when I should have re-stood for that seat, I moved job to Preston, moved house to Preston, and didn't re-stand. And sadly, there's not been a councillor from the Liberal Democrats or the Liberals in that area since, which is a pity. When I got into Preston, obviously I was getting into a new job, so I was a bit of time out of activity. I also did a 1-year secondment for a degree. Again, this took me away from political activity, apart from a bit of leafleting and so forth in the 70s. So it was into the 80s before I got involved.
Yeah, and I wonder, I mean, that obviously such a change, but I mean, a lot of people listening, because we've had episodes on the podcast about how you deal with being working full-time and being a campaigner and a counsellor. So do you think that's changed much for you? So, those pressures are always going to exist.
Yeah, in a sense, I was very fortunate that within the education world, because I was in teaching, in the education world, the right to be a counsellor and attend meetings and so forth was good. I also was helped a great deal by the staff at Garstang High, where I finished my teaching and finished my teaching career. At that time, I was able to do some crafty swaps with 1 or 2 people. If an odd meeting popped up at an unusual time, I could bail out, and then they'd fill in my class, and then I'd fill in their class on another week.
Yeah.
So I was treated kindly. I suspect some back in the staff room probably said, "That Hackett bloke off again on another council swan," but I never heard them say it.
Yeah. So as long as you don't hear them, then you might be all right.
That's right.
But I mean, what has been the biggest change for you then, from 50 years of basically campaigning? What has been the big difference for you?
So much more is done now, particularly by Liberal Democrats more than others, in between elections.
Yeah.
Originally, you did your election stuff. You started at the end of March. You finished in May at the count, and that was pretty well it. When there was a general election, because of the manpower that we have or that we haven't, it meant that you couldn't cover that amount of stuff. So actually, door-to-door canvassing of everybody just wasn't on. But over the years, keeping in touch through the years, I started off, as I say, with an odd council newsletter back in Cleveland. But once I got into Preston, I got involved with Gordon Payne in Preston, then with Ron Marshall and other people who were fighting in Ingold and other wards. I haven't completed the set yet of actually taking part in any by-elections or other elections in other wards.
Yeah.
There's a number of Preston seats where I've never actually set foot, but not many. And once you got elected, as I did in 1987, on the back, well, we had a run of good stuff. We had a by-election in 1965, which we put the Liberal Democrat vote in Cadley up by something like 800, but we didn't win it. The next year, Alistair Hodge did win it by 1,000, and the year after, I followed him. But that was 1987, which was an interesting general election year as well.
Yeah.
The one came in May, the following in June, and the whole pattern of politics generally changed then.
Yeah.
And I was able to keep that ward going until I finally retired from the City Council, as it was then, in 2010.
Yeah.
I'd done...
And then they got lumbered with me.
12 years on the County Council as well.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate that I got a good, solid seat. We don't have many solid seats, but I think this was the nearest thing we've got to it. Over the years, with good colleagues, with Mike Onion, with Bill Borrow, with other people in that ward, and then being followed by yourself in that ward.
Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Prater Rains. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Prater Rains have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Prater Rains are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Prater Rains website at praterrains.co.uk/liberal-democrats. This podcast has been sponsored by the Katora Coffee Club, the UK's most environmentally friendly coffee club. There are over 400 independent roasters in the UK, each one crafting coffee in their own unique style. Katora Coffee Club works with some of the best to take you on a voyage of coffee discovery. The Katora Coffee Club delivers ethically sourced and independently roast coffee directly to your door. Each month you'll receive between 2 and 4 bags of coffee and their monthly extract magazine. Even better for Lib Dem podcast listeners, use the code BETTERCOFFEE to save 5% on subscriptions and gift boxes for a limited time only. All Katora Coffee Club boxes are carbon negative and offset the CO2. So why not do some good, enjoy some great coffee and check out the website www.katoracoffeeclub.com. Now, back to the podcast. Campaigning obviously has... I remember when you were made honorary alderman, and people were giving you your speeches as they do. The word that was used by a lot was you were a gentleman. But do you think that? I mean, I know also that you are not against politics tricks and things like that. You've taught me all sorts. But do you think politics has changed beyond all measure from even from when you retired?
Well, obviously, digital electronic world has changed it out of all recognition. Yeah. I don't have to stick up bits of the electoral register on a piece of card to make them a canvas card anymore.
Yeah.
And a lot of other things have changed too, I think. The amount of stuff that's now issued on paper is a lot greater. It's a lot better quality. The old sort of A3 black and white things stuff through doors, we don't do anymore in that way.
I'm really curious. So far you've talked about how you didn't knock on doors as much. You didn't put as much paper through the door. So what was your kind of, back in, say, the 70s, etc., how would you then get in contact with voters? Were people just more politically engaged generally?
I think they were obviously a lot more engaged about things in a national level. But I think we did a good amount of knocking on doors. I mean, I learnt, as I say, from Alistair Hodge back in the late 80s. We did, for that first campaign when he got elected, we did something in Cadley Ward alone. We did 12 or 15 different street letters before polling day. Yeah. And we'd done a knock-up. We'd done a 7 o'clock early morning. Yeah. Once they moved the poll to 7 o'clock, that became a little less possible. But we did. And people said to us, anybody who gets up before 7 o'clock in the morning to go out and put a leaflet through my door is worth a vote. Yeah. Okay. And it was that sort of effort. And it was the doors, and people remembered you year after year, whether you were the candidate or working for somebody else. Yeah.
And so what would be your advice to someone starting right now? You know, because Lib Dems are in a funny old place at the moment. You know, politics in Britain's in a funny old place at the moment. What would you say to someone starting out?
Well, first of all, be realistic. It's no use coming to somebody and saying, I'd like to be a candidate, and when I win next year, so and so and so and so will happen. Yeah. No, be realistic. Secondly, take your ward on face to face as much as you possibly can. Yeah. Keep records of what you said, just in case it comes back, and keep records of what the others have said, so you can throw it in their face.
Yeah, that's right. And so I'm very curious now, because obviously during that whole time you've been campaigning, you've never once been in power, have you? You've never. No. So, and
I've been at good places. Yeah. The best bit was 1991, when I actually had a Liberal Democrat MP in my constituency.
Was it Ribble Valley?
That was the Ribble Valley by-election, and we worked from October, November, when Maggie Thatcher went. We went from then till the following March. The Tories, stupidly, left the by-election running that long, and they regretted it. But driving back from Clitheroe at 4 a.m. with an MP, boy, was that worth it.
But it's interesting, because at the moment there's a lot of talk of the dynamics of politics shifting. You know, alignment shifting. Yes. Tories winning socially conservative working class votes in northern areas. Yes. Lib Dems taking somewhere like St Albans, not only now having the MP, but also we've just taken the council as well. Yes. So how do you see these in the long term? Do you think this is a cyclical route, or do you think these things are more to stay?
It has seemed cyclical, because we've had these occasions when we've had a very good result. Obviously, by-elections, Orpington, Ribble Valley and lots of others we've had, which have really given us a jump forward. We could do with one of those right now.
Well, that's a good point. And when this goes out, we encourage everyone to go to down to Buckinghamshire, to the Chesham by-election, which is happening right now. I've booked my train tickets, and hotels are very cheap. So any listeners, please do go if you can.
Yes, indeed. Well, I mean, we said when we had the Ribble Valley by-election, and we got people from all over the place, many of them. We had one officer permanently trying to find bed and breakfast for people with our members, which took some doing. We had people from all over the place. And what we said after that was, OK, they came here for us, we'll go there for them. And members, I remember going up to Aberdeen and Angus by-election there. Nicholl Stephen. Who won that seat. But you went there and you talked on the doors, and you didn't seem to get a lot of information, because I think for a start they didn't understand voices from England appearing in West Aberdeen. We expected to go up into the nice valleys up beyond to the west of Aberdeen. No, Joe and I got the council estates on the outskirts of Aberdeen. But we went to the meeting the last night before before poll. we went to the meeting and heard Paddy Ashdown speak. And we'd seen, as we arrived into Scotland, the boards on the street sides, on the farm sides. And we said, we're going to win this. And we damn well did. And that was a great feeling. And going to conferences, as I did then, I don't now, that too was an inspiring event. And I can remember the particular one at Blackpool Norbrick Hydro, when they had to decide whether we were going to join with the SDP to make what is now the Liberal Democrats.
What was that like?
That was an interesting day. There were people speaking on both sides very, very vehemently. And at one point, Paddy Ashdown stood up and spoke. And myself and another counsellor who lived in Garstang in those days, we looked at one another and we both said to one another, that's his leadership speech for the future. And the lady in front turned round and glared at us. She was Mrs. Ashdown.
But it is a fun. And so, where do you see the Lib Dems now? How? And you've seen, obviously, locally, we've had a mixed set of results here locally, and
we've had that before.
And particularly, during coalition, where we hung on in our seats more or less within the city. But where do you see the Lib Dems? What do you think are the problems? Where do you think our strengths are?
Problem one is getting more active, younger candidates. I shouldn't be ageist, but I've got to be, because some of us are a little too long in the tooth. I think the other thing is that we've got to begin to win Labour seats in Preston, if that's where we're going to make any progress.
Yeah.
Because a Tory said to me yesterday, he said, it's not much use us winning seats from you. This was Ken Hudson. He said, it's not much use we winning seats. We've got to win some from Labour before we can make any difference. And he's right.
So do you think that from a national scale, because obviously this podcast goes out to everyone across the whole of the UK, and actually hello to some of our international listeners as well. So so there's a lot of talk at the moment, and we had our kind of election review last week where, Lib Dems have got to be focused.
Yes.
Maybe it might only be 25, 30 seats we can win at the next election by being hyper-focused. And obviously, places like Preston are not going to be in that mix.
No.
So what do you say to Lib Dems in those areas that aren't on that immediate kind of hit list?
Well, we experienced this when we'd held a seat in Ribble Valley. The year after, we were told, you're not going to be top priority. We've got to do something somewhere else.
Yeah.
And we were, shall we say, a little unhappy. But we realised the realism of what it was.
Yeah.
And we've had these seats that we've held for a long time. Local examples would be Southport and so on. Places where somehow change of personnel, change of attitude has meant that they were not kept and they went down the league. There's new seats going to come up. Some of them are going to come up in strange places.
Yeah.
And
like Westminster, for example, where we like some of those London seats where
London seats a good example. Yeah. And maybe some in the northeast and places like this, which is where we've got to show that we're not just a southern home counties and southwest party.
Yeah.
That's very important.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is too, we've got to show a more distinct view. I mean, this is what people say. Well, tell us what you stand for. People are saying at the moment that the Labour Party doesn't say what it stands for.
Yeah.
That's something that has been thrown at us in the past. We've got to get that right.
Yeah.
And we've got to get the people who are up there, as Nick Clegg did to begin with, as Paddy Ashdown always did, as David Steele did in his day. These are the people we've got to get because they're nationally recognised.
Yeah.
And I think nationally recognised not just for being party leader, but in their own area and in other areas. If anything happens to Wales or Scotland in terms of independence votes and the like, we're going to find that a sticky one. And we've got to come up with an answer. And at the minute, I don't think we've got one ready.
So just it kind of makes sense for me to lead on from that and say, okay, what do you think being a Liberal Democrat means?
Well, it's being of conviction, it's being not trying always to follow a trad version of things, looking at issues in a very incisive way.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yes, you've got to be unpopular. You know, my first interest in Liberals at all went back to 1956 Suez when I was at college. And I thought, we've got this wrong. And there weren't many people saying it was wrong. Not enough people saying it was wrong. And the same thing would apply to issues now.
Yeah.
I think being distinctive is important.
And being brave, is that?
And being brave with issues that some people would just run away from. I think the population in general is looking for somebody they can believe in as opposed to oppose.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's important. That's what's happened with the Red Wall.
Yeah. And do you think, I mean, that the Red Wall, just touching on Labour there, because Labour are at the moment trying to face two ways. They're trying to obviously appeal to the working class votes they've always had, and a lot of times have taken for granted. You've seen the successes Lib Dems had just a couple of weeks ago in places like Barnsley and Sunderland and places like that. Other Tories have had taking County Durham for the first time in 100 years. But Labour's got to try and face that direction as well as facing to the metropolitan university graduate kind of thing. And I'm not sure how they do that, but isn't the same question going to be asked of Lib Dems? How do Lib Dems do that as well?
Yes. Yeah, you're right. We've had people who have said to us on the doorstep, I used to vote whichever, but now I'm voting for you, but we've got to give them a reason.
Yeah.
Locally, we do this well. Nationally, not well enough. The time, as I say, on occasions when we've had the good results, it has been because our national voice has got louder. People in areas not used to having Liberal Democrats around suddenly found they were worth having, and the service they gave was greater. We don't have the luxury of ultra-safe seats. We don't have the luxury of people getting a job for life because they live in that area. That doesn't always work. Some of our best campaigners have been the people who unfortunately moved away from our area. This is something that happens to everybody.
Yeah.
In a sense, it works the other way. You moved into our area.
I did, yeah, sorry about that.
Which was good.
But I'm very curious about just the change in dynamics of what you see going forward as well. And, you know, obviously working hard and things, and there'll be a lot of Lib Dems, and we've had it in the last few weeks where someone like Mark, who listeners don't know was a Lib Dem caller, who worked his socks off and still lost.
Yes.
And your view is that sometimes you can do everything right and still get beat. So you've just got to dust yourself off and keep going.
Yes. I think that's the other thing. We have always, all parties have them, I suppose, people who come along, do a campaign, don't get in and think, oh, well, that's it, I'm going home. It's a bit like taking your boots home from the match, you know, it's not on. Whereas people who stick at it, and some would say, well, are you a bit insane sticking at it this long? Maybe, but you believe in it. And if you believe in it, you do it. And if you do it, you go out and get your shoe leather worn.
Yeah. That's
what it's about.
And there's no cutting corner. I mean, I'm still of the opinion. You know me. We do lots of stuff online and modern ways of treating data, etc. But actually, traditional campaigning techniques are still the bedrock of most campaigns.
And this is what you see. There was a letter in the press fairly recently saying, I didn't get any leaflets, said nobody came to my door, so I didn't bother voting. And people are like that. There's a lot more going through the electronic world. Witness the podcast we're doing now.
Yeah.
Getting to more people across a wider range, and particularly a wider range in age, because the digital the digital acceptance and usage is moving up in age.
Yeah.
A lot more people, particularly during the recent times, elderly people who never touched their computer at all, got persuaded into it by their sons and daughters and etc.
And it's kind of almost
It's
gone
widening it.
Yeah, and it's also gone slightly. It's shifted as well, where you look at some of the value of Facebook ads or something like that, or where you do it, where a key demographic for that now is probably about middle-aged people, whereas younger people don't get letters anymore. So if you were to do a personalised letter to a young person now, whereas digital adverts they see all the time on all their Twitter streams and everything else, but actually for them, so it's almost slightly changed where traditional techniques for younger voters, modern techniques for slightly older voters seems to be the way it's going.
You've got to balance the two.
So being a counsellor, you've talked about obviously. So you retired when you got on to Preston City Council.
Yeah.
You had you just retired or
no? When I got on Preston City Council in '87, I did another 3 years of teaching, but at the time teaching was wanting to lose staff, and I got a very good package of early retirement.
Okay.
Which worked exactly right because I'd been elected and then re-elected in the 70. Then afterwards, county council came up, and I was able to get elected there. So I was virtually working full-time counsellor.
Yeah.
I still did a bit of supply teaching and other stuff, but that's what I made the job into, and it worked in the sense that I could do times when some of the other councillors could not do.
Yeah.
I was able to shuffle the two. Like you, I've had the job of running up and down the main street of Preston to go from the town hall to the county hall and back. And other events of this sort. And I mean, I was lucky in the sense I could do like an odd twinning visit and things like that from Preston. These were things I could do because I was retired and I was still fairly active, as I hope I still am. Yeah. But it's one of those things that some people find that running their job and their council work is a lot harder.
Yeah,
as we've got witness of our own members.
Yeah. And the statistics speak for themselves. The amount of young people who get elected is very low. The amount of young people who stay elected after having done a term is even lower.
Yes, that's true.
So, I mean, I'm curious. I mean, I can see pros and cons. Do you think councillors should be paid more, and it should be made into I mean, the public probably won't like it either way, but ignoring the public perception, do you think, because when I look at councils, and obviously on Lancashire and on Preston, there are a lot of what we would call lobby fodder councillors who do very little, it seems, within the chamber, etc.
Yes.
So I would say the quality probably does need to improve, but how do you improve the quality of councillors?
Well, councillors in general, I think that the amount of training anybody gets is minimal. And in terms of industry or anywhere else, it's appalling that you're in a council, you're thrown in within days almost.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the problems that the council has to do, and it's got to build up its training. They should have what I would call a professional training officer to deal with this situation, and do a lot of it on a one-to-one, not just come and have a chat about what the committees do and that's it. No, it's got to be better than that. I think the other thing is that within the parties, where you've got a larger party in a council, there is more space for passengers, I would tend to call them. And this happens, and especially where you've got wards that tend not to change hands over a long period of time.
Yeah, they can sit. I mean, you see it in some areas of Preston where it's been nothing other than Labour probably since the dawn of time, and those councillors, I've never heard them speak or do anything, really.
No, this is it. They may be doing something in their ward, but it's not very obvious.
Yeah.
I think ours have to work 3 times harder than anybody else because there's less of us.
Yeah.
And that would apply at county, it would apply at parliamentary level.
Yeah, and we've done other episodes on, basically starting from scratch and being lone councillors and stuff like that within, and it can be a very nervous place. But there'll be people listening to this podcast who have just been elected for the very first time, and I suppose the advice to them is just ask. There's a whole community of us out here, whether it's the ALDC or colleagues wherever all over the country. Just ask, because you're never alone.
No. And problems, take them to somebody you trust.
Yeah.
If it has to be another counsellor, fine. If it has to be an officer, fine on that.
Yeah.
The officers appreciate being asked.
Yeah. And so, final thoughts really from you, Alan. So what would you say has been the biggest change, or the most positive change, actually? Let's go with something upbeat. What has been the most positive change in your 50 years of campaigning for the Liberals and now the Lib Dems?
I think it is that it is much more of an all-year-round job.
Some people would question whether that's a positive.
Is that a positive?
Yeah.
Well, it is the way we do things. Yeah. Learn from that. Those are the people who succeed.
Yeah.
I think the other thing very much is it's no longer regarded in the general public as being something of note, a sort of an honour or whatever. One time I think it was, and you look back in particularly earliest last century, very much so. And I think that is no longer the case. Equally, it's a lot better now than it once was in terms of the probity of counsellors. Every so often a bad apple turns up, but they're a lot less often than they were, and a lot less people now say they're only in it for what they can get out of it. And I think if you're a Liberal Democrat, be assured you're going to put a lot in, and you're going to get a lot of satisfaction out of it. But in terms of what we might call worldly goods, forget it.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned on the podcast before, if you wanted money and power, being a Lib Dem councillor probably isn't the way to go. No, but thank you so much for that, Alan. Really appreciate your time coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Normally with our guests, we say check them out on social media, but you don't have any options with that now, because Alan is absolutely not on social media. But thank you so much for watching and listening. Do follow everything to do with the podcast at Lib Dem Pod, and that's on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Like I say, if you are listening on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. If you're watching on Facebook, make sure you like the page as well, and give a comment below. Who's the longest serving campaigner in your area? I mean, Alan's been around a long time. You mentioned Bill Borrow, who has sadly passed away, but he went from coalition to coalition, didn't he? He went from 45
he fought the 45 election as a young lad.
We really appreciate all of you for tuning in. Do, like I say, follow the show. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back with another episode very soon.
Thank you. Bye.